Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, In Search of the Black Tiger, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Aditya Panda. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you for being here with us today. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Rob, and hello, everyone. This is my first webinar of the year, so happy New Year to all of you. Today's topic is one that would usually, if I went on about it in all the detail that I'd like to, it would probably take 3 or 4 webinars to do this. But I've been, I've tried to keep it concise, and I'll tell it to you in in a way that will not go too much into the detail of the biology of it. In fact, the objective of today's webinar is not at all to flood you with information and data, but it is more of a story that I would like to share, a story that if you were on a trip with me, you'd probably hear around the campfire. And so we will keep it slightly short and trimmed down, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of it, and I can cover a lot of your questions then. And before I get into the topic, a lot of you must be wondering what black tigers are. Before I get into the topic, let me reintroduce myself for those of you who are listening to one of my webinars for the first time, and to those of you who haven't traveled with me on a NatHab expedition. My name is Aditya Panda, and I have been leading NatHab expeditions in India since 2016. I primarily lead the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, India Tiger Quest, and India Tiger Safari, which is a Photo Pro trip. So yeah, mainly tiger trips here in India. When I am not leading NatHab expeditions, I am based in a state in eastern India called Odisha, and I work here in conservation, primarily in tiger and elephant landscapes. I'm an honorary wildlife warden in this state, and there are a few reserves that I work pretty closely with for conservation. And the place that I'm going to talk to you about today is one of those places. It is not on the safari map or the tourism map, so you might not hear of it very often, but it is a very, very interesting ecosystem with very interesting wildlife, and that is what I'm going to talk to you about today. The place I'm talking about is called Similipal. Similipal is a protected area, which is a generalized term we use for areas that are set aside for wildlife, absolutely protected from human use of any sort, and protected primarily with the objective of conserving wildlife. And Similipal is located in eastern India. I have a bunch of maps here that show you where it is. The blue dot is where I am right now. Similipal is, it's a massive landscape, and it enjoys various levels of protection. It is a national park. It is a tiger reserve. It's an elephant reserve, and a wildlife sanctuary as well. A wildlife sanctuary, when we talk of one in India, is similar to what you would call a state park in the US. It's not a place where rescued wild animals are kept. It's a natural habitat that is protected. Similipal is also a UNESCO biosphere reserve, and it's a pretty large, massive landscape, primarily of moist deciduous forest, but also with some what we call sky islands, areas of high altitude, that, or relatively high altitude, that kind of are like island land masses at that altitude in that region, which is to say that there are parts of Similipal that lie in an altitudinal zone that does not exist anywhere near that landscape in that part of the country, and that gives those regions some really unique climate and biogeographic characteristics. So we do have some evergreen and semi-evergreen forests as well in Similipal, besides the regular moist deciduous forest that we find across large parts of peninsular India. Similipal is, it's got tremendous biodiversity, relatively high amount of endemism. It is home to most of peninsular India's megafauna like tigers, elephants, leopards, gaur, sloth bear, and so on. And it is also the source of 11 perennial streams and rivers. Similipal has been protected, in the modern sense of things, since 1973. In 1973, a lot of you might have heard this a lot of times in the past. In 1973, India started, focused efforts at conserving tigers through a project called Project Tiger. And Project Tiger started by identifying 9 key areas across India that held a lot of promise for tiger conservation. And Similipal was among those first 9. Today we have 54 tiger reserves. So, the number of tiger reserves that we have has increased tremendously since 1973 in these 50 years. But Similipal has been among the first 9, so it's been conserved, protected for tiger conservation since 50 years. It is the 6th largest tiger reserve in India and is 2,750 square kilometers big. That is about 1,060 square miles, if I'm correct. The core area of Similipal alone is about 1,200 square kilometers, which is perhaps the size of the average tiger reserve, core and buffer included, in India. So that's a really, really big core area. And, the place has immense potential for tiger conservation. But that hasn't been the case so far. Those of you who have traveled to India on our tiger trips and have visited places like Kanha, like Bandhavgarh, like Kaziranga, or Ranthambore, these parks are absolutely at the pinnacle of conservation. They are parks that are managed really, really well and have seen tremendous success in tiger and other wildlife conservation throughout their conservation history. And if you've traveled with me, or if you've heard my webinars in the past, you would have heard me speaking no end of how successful India has been in conserving Asia's megafauna, particularly given the fact that India is such a land-starved and densely populated country. And while sometimes that might sound all rosy, and it is a fact that very few other countries, if any, have managed to do as much for conserving large mammals, conserving habitats and megafauna. Even here in India, it's not perfect. it's not all rosy. Not all of our tiger reserves are doing as well as Kanha or Bandhavgarh or Ranthambore or Kaziranga or Corbett or, the dozen or so really well-known tiger reserves. Here in this picture that I took back in 2009, you see a park ranger with the plaster cast of a tiger track, which we call pug marks. The plaster cast of a tiger track in one hand, and in his other hand, he's carrying a poacher's arrow that he found on the forest floor. So, that in a gist explains what Similipal has been going through, throughout its history, throughout its conservation history. It's a reserve that has seen tremendous bushmeat poaching. It's a reserve that is always at risk from organized elephant poachers who are after bull elephants with tusks for the illicit trade in ivory. There are a lot of human habitations still inside the reserve, which exert tremendous amounts of anthropogenic pressure on the reserve, besides being the source of a lot of illegal livestock grazing, illegal felling, as well as poaching. Similipal also has a rather controversial history of mismanagement for several years in the past, and this mismanagement had been, in ways typical to bureaucracy, covered up for a very, very long time until good science and public scrutiny and watchdog conservation basically exposed everything and forced the state administration to stop looking the other way and to try and fix things. And as a result of all of these, for several years, especially through the late 90s and through the early 2000s, Similipal had seen a lot of severe depletion of megafauna. There weren't as many tigers as it was being claimed. 90s and early 2000s. The park management at one point of time in 2004 was claiming that Similipal had 101 tigers, which turned out to be far from the truth. All of this came out later with changes in management practices, with changes in tiger estimation methods. And if I went deep into that, I could go on forever. So just to sum it up, things had not been very great in this park, and this park struggled a lot, saw a lot of wildlife depletion, and as you will find out later in today's webinar, it is now on the comeback. So one more thing that I wanted to mention before I went to the next slide. In a lot of our well-known tiger reserves, where tourism is operational, where people from all over the world come and visit, hoping to see a tiger, tiger sightings are almost taken for granted, not only by the people that live around those reserves, who have tigers be a part of their everyday lives. Even the visitors who come kind of expect to see a tiger in their 3 or 4 nights in that park, and become very disappointed a lot of times if they do not see one. And it is when I visit parks like Similipal that I understand the value of having other reserves where tigers are doing the way they should be doing, where their numbers are stable and growing, and where sightings occur every other day, and where, you know, coming across tiger tracks or hearing tiger roars is the most natural thing. You know, it is when I visit places like Similipal that I truly understand and appreciate the value of having places like Kanha, like Ranthambore, like Bandhavgarh, you know, places that we visit on our NatHab expeditions here in India. It is then that I truly visit what it is, how valuable it is to have places like that where tigers are thriving. You know, even in those parks, back in the 70s and 80s, when those parks were in, you know, a severely depleted state, and the park rangers and park managers who literally brought those parks back onto their feet by putting in sweat, blood, and tears, you know, for them, coming across tiger tracks was reason enough to open a bottle of whiskey in the evening and celebrate. You know, when I come across people who get easily disappointed by probably not seeing a tiger or not having a good enough sighting, that is what I can't help thinking of. So Similipal is a park like that. You know, there are people who have worked 30 years in that park, spent all their lives working for the tiger, for that park, faced all kinds of threats and hardship, living away from family, living in a really remote area where even today, you know, you can't expect to get a cell phone signal, where even today it takes a while to get a message across from your family to your remote post inside the park. And there have been people who have worked their entire careers in that park, 20 years, 30 years, and probably seen tigers 5 or 6 times in that entire period. There have been, in fact, been some who have never seen a tiger even in a 30-year career. And of course, one of the key reasons behind that has been that the number of tigers in that reserve has been very, very low, much lower than it should have been. But even so, you know, if you spend 30 years in an area that has even half a dozen tigers or a dozen tigers, you would expect to see tigers fairly often enough. Anyhow, to come back to Similipal, Similipal is unique in many ways, and one way in which you know, an unenviable way in which it is unique is that over the course of time, Similipal has become sort of a tiger island. When I say that, what I mean is that the tigers of Similipal have no connection with any other tigers in the adjoining landscapes. Similipal is part of what we call the Central India and Eastern Ghats tiger landscape, and it is located at the easternmost extremity of that landscape. There are structural corridors that connect it to other tiger landscapes and other tiger habitats, but these are not functional. What I mean when I say that is that there are physical forests that connect Similipal to other forests, but there is no tiger movement between other tiger landscapes and Similipal. And the reason behind that is that, you know, for tigers to successfully move between two tiger landscapes, it is not just important that the two landscapes remain connected. It is also important that the two landscapes be close enough to each other that tigers can disperse. Yes, tigers do travel, you know, they're known to travel hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers looking for new habitats. but almost always in those long distance dispersal cases, it is young male tigers that do that. Females will never go farther than maybe 60 miles from their natal habitat. Even 60 miles is a long distance for a young tigress to disperse. Tigresses typically form their territories around the territories of their mother, in or around, close by. But young male tigers, they face a lot of pressure from established male tigers, including their own fathers, and they can be forced to migrate, to disperse for several hundred kilometers, often even through human habitation, to find other suitable habitats. So what has happened in Similipal is that there has been no immigration or emigration for at least 50 years. The Similipal tiger population has been isolated for at least 50 years, if not more. So, that is always something that is of concern when it comes to conservation. And that can lead to inbreeding, which is that when a population is genetically isolated and a population is also small, there is very little genetic diversity within that population, and invariably closely related individuals will start mating with each other and produce cubs or offspring that have very unhealthy genetic diversity. This became apparent in 1993. In 1993, in a village on the northwestern fringe of Similipal, a tiger entered a cowshed, and a young man who owned the cowshed shot the tiger with a poison arrow and killed it. Now, tigers entering cowsheds to kill cattle is something that is fairly common around tiger habitats. It is something that is fairly common with big cats, tigers, leopards, snow leopards even. And often when they enter a cattle shed and people discover that, a crowd collects and the animal gets panicked and usually can't find its way out of the shed. So that kind of a situation might have arisen in 1993 when this happened. When that happened, this young man saw the tiger was trapped and shot it with a poison arrow. And what was interesting about that was not the fact that he shot a tiger, which was something that he did in self-defense, and therefore he was, let off. He was not. There were no charges that were pressed against him. But what was interesting was that this tiger had very unusual coloration, and it appeared to be what was called black. I remember this story from 1993. I was in school. I was quite young then, probably 7 or 8 years old. And I remember my mother actually reading this little news piece to me from the newspaper. There was no picture with it, just the story. And the story described that a tiger had been shot by someone in Similipal, and that unlike normal tigers that are orange and have black stripes, this tiger appeared to be black with orange stripes. Of course, that wasn't the case, as we will find out later. But you couldn't blame someone for imagining that on seeing a tiger like this. It was absolutely unusually colored. And after that, the incident was forgotten for many, many years. As usual, staff in the park rarely ever got to see tigers. For many years, India had been calculating the number of its tigers using a method, a highly controversial method called the pug mark census method, where, like this gentleman is in this picture, in places where tigers were likely to walk every 4 years, in places where tigers were likely to walk in protected areas and tiger habitats, a portion of the road would be sort of cleaned up of all leaf litter and other such debris, and loam would be spread on it evenly, so that whenever a tiger walked there, a clear imprint of its tracks were found. And once these tracks were found, a plaster cast would be made of them, or somebody would sit with a piece of glass placed over the track and draw an imprint using a permanent marker or a glass pencil. And then, on the principle that every tiger had pug marks that were shaped uniquely and unique to it, a number of people would sit around examining the left hind pug mark, the left hind track of every set of tiger tracks found, and try and identify one from the other. So ironically, this methodology was invented in Similipal in the 1970s, and it was in use in India, all across India, all the way to 2004. Of course, in the 70s and 80s, you could excuse the method by saying that no other better technique existed to census or estimate the population of a species as elusive as the tiger. But by the 90s, much more scientifically reliable, robust methods using trap cameras had been developed, and there was a lot of pressure from scientists and conservation biologists that were independent of the government to use that method instead of using the pug mark census method. But there was a lot of reluctance on forest departments across India from doing that, because with the pug mark census method, you could come up with any number that you pleased. It was so inaccurate and so prone to misuse that in some reserves where tiger populations had been plummeting, fake numbers and fake census figures were created, and on paper tiger numbers were shown to be growing, while in reality they were actually going down. And Similipal was one of the reserves that suffered that throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. So what happened as a result was that Similipal kept having an isolated and very small tiger population, a population that was not only isolated from other tiger populations in central India, with which it could potentially have exchanged genes, but a population that even by itself was so small that even within it, the genetic diversity was very, very low, and inbreeding has been the norm within that population. In 2006, after a huge debacle that happened when a tiger reserve in northwestern India called Sariska lost all its tigers, the census methodology was changed. Finally, a lot of reforms were brought into India's tiger conservation policies and methods, and from pug marks we moved on to camera traps. And when the first set of camera traps were laid in Similipal, it was found that the number of tigers in the reserve was a quarter of what it was being claimed to be. But besides that reality check of telling us the actual number of tigers in that reserve, the camera traps threw another surprise, and that was this. this was the first ever black tiger or pseudo-melanistic tiger to have been captured on camera trap or on any camera alive and in the wild. This tigress, once again sort of revived that conversation around black tigers that had started and had been forgotten in 1993. And ever since, we have been camera trapping black tigers or melanistic tigers or pseudo-melanistic tigers, as we should correctly be calling them, frequently in Similipal. So what is a black tiger? Well, a black tiger is just a regular tiger. It is Panthera tigris. It is the Indian tiger or Bengal tiger, as the tigers of the subspecies of tigers found in India is known as. And it is not a different subspecies or a different species. It is very much the same tigers that we know as Bengal tigers or Indian tigers, except that due to a mutation in their genes, they have a much higher expression of melanin, which is the pigment that gives, the pigment that decides the darkness of the coat color. These tigers have an excessive amount of melanin in them, which causes their stripes to be much wider and much darker than regular tigers. And a lot of times these stripes are so dark and so wide that they merge into each other, giving the impression of a black tiger or a black tiger with orange stripes. They're not, in appearance, they're not like your black leopards or black jaguars, which are totally black, but they're more like regular tigers, except as if somebody had spilled the ink while drawing the stripes on them. So here you see a normal colored tigress with a black, quote unquote, black cub. And a few years ago in the zoo in my city, we had another surprise when a white tigress mated to a normal tiger, gave birth to 4 cubs. 2 of them were normal colored, while one was a pseudo-melanistic normal colored tiger and another was a pseudo-melanistic white tiger. So DNA analysis showed that both the parents had roots, in tigers that had probably been captured or rescued from the Similipal landscape many, many years ago. So our zoo happens to be the only zoo that has bred melanistic tigers, these tigers have not been captured from the wild, of course, they've been bred out of zoo stock. So that's what melanistic tigers or pseudo-melanistic tigers or black tigers, as they're variously called, are in a gist. Here you see a normal tigress. You can actually also see the camera trap on the tree. We put camera traps in pairs, so we can capture both flanks of a tiger. So you see a normal colored tigress. If you look to her right and behind her, you can see the tiny eye shine of a tiny pseudo-melanistic cub. And to her left, behind the trees, you can see a normal colored cub. And I really want to show you this video. This is very, very recent. This is an entirely melanistic family. You see the taller tiger is the mother, and here you have 3 beautiful pseudo-melanistic cubs. So right now we are seeing that the proportion of pseudo-melanistic tigers in Similipal is increasing very, very rapidly. More than 50% of the tigers there now carry pseudo-melanism, and I suspect that unless we introduce new genes by getting in tigers from other landscapes and translocating them into Similipal. In a generation or two, the entire population of tigers in Similipal might be pseudo-melanistic, because they're all very closely related. They all carry the recessive gene, and when two parents with the same recessive gene mate, they're very likely to produce offspring that will actively express that gene, and that is happening across the population now. Now, Similipal has been a place that has been really close to my heart. You see, I was halfway into my conservation career, halfway into my field career before I got into guiding. Before I started guiding, I was working primarily in conservation on the ground in tiger and elephant landscapes. And Similipal was one of the places that had it had a profound impact on me, not only in shaping my field knowledge and giving me a lot of field craft and making me understand the dynamics of tiger conservation, but also the place is so incredibly beautiful that I always had really strong feelings for the place, still do, and I always felt a very, very deep commitment to do everything I possibly could to bring that place back to optimal standards or optimal levels. There was always this immense disappointment and frustration that here is this fantastic habitat, absolutely top-class tiger habitat, but because of so many reasons, it has it has a tiger population that has been subsisting in rather suboptimal conditions. When the first camera trap estimation was carried out, Similipal had under 25 tigers, and when the last one was carried out in 2022, the results came out in 2022, but the data was from 2018. That number had gone down to about 18 animals. And this was always frustrating because this landscape can sustain easily 100, 150 tigers. And I was always sort of consumed with this strong, desire to bring this place back up to the same standards as Kanha or Bandhavgarh or Ranthambore. And, I had seen tigers all over India. I had seen tigers in central India, in northern India, northeastern India, in southern India. But I had never seen a tiger in my home state where, where I cut my teeth on conservation and natural history, and the state whose the very same forest that inspired me to become who I am were the forests where I had always dreamt of seeing tigers, but I had never managed to do that because there had been a lot of tiger decline from across my state. And even in places like Similipal, where tigers existed, they existed in such low densities and low numbers that seeing them was, absolutely, very, very difficult. And just coming across tiger tracks in places like that was enough to bring joy to one's heart, and one had to be satisfied with that. In 2009, January of 2009, I happened to be in Similipal as part of a tiger estimation exercise. And on my last morning, I had come across this fresh tiger kill. There were 4 of us walking in file, and we were walking up an animal trail in the jungle, looking for tiger tracks. And the person who was walking right up in the front thought he saw some animal disappear into the bushes. And when we arrived there, we saw this sambar stag lying dead. We noticed that it had just been killed, and it had been killed by a tiger. And I asked the other 3 people to walk on ahead and continue with the census, while I, yes, that's me in 2009, lanky and clean shaven, I decided to sit behind some bushes and wait, hoping for the tiger to come back to the kill. But it did not, and I had to leave that day. And the very next morning, the local forest guards came back to check on the kill, and they found a black tigress sitting and feeding on the kill. So that was the closest I had come to seeing a black tiger back in 2009. Now, Similipal is a place that is not open to tourism, or it's not open to safari tourism the way we see it in other parts of India. And the core area of the park is absolutely off limits to the common public. So one can either go there as part of studies, or if one has privileged entry in various capacities in wildlife conservation. So for my visits to Similipal, to see Similipal, to watch wildlife there, I have always had to be dependent on privileged access, which has not always been possible, of course. In 2014, I made my last of my frequent visits to Similipal, and after that, I got fully engrossed in my guiding career, and I couldn't come back to the park for a long period of 9 years. One thing or the other kept me busy, and I could not find the time or the access during that period to come back and spend time in Similipal. But that changed last year. And when I say last year, I mean last month. Now, of course, for the past few years, I have been working, as I said, in various capacities, closely with the state's Wildlife Conservation Department. And that allowed me access again into places like this. And last month, I found time to come back to Similipal. And this time, I came back hoping to finally get to see a tiger in Similipal, hopefully a black tiger. And I have seen tigers on more than 2,000 occasions across India throughout my adult life. And it is absolutely astonishing and disappointing that none of these had been in my home state. My tiger sighting count in my home state of Odisha had been 0. So on my last visit to Similipal, which was in December, I had made up my mind that this time, no matter what, I must use my best tracking skills and do whatever it takes to see a tiger in Similipal. And so I went back, and accompanying me was a Similipal veteran, a very well-known forest officer from our state called Mr. Suresh Mishra, who served in Similipal in the 1970s and 80s. In fact, he even served as field director, which is the top boss of the park. And he served 11 years in Similipal. And in 11 years, he had seen only one tiger in the wild. And, when I told him that I was going to Similipal, he was keen to accompany me. And, I was happy because here was a, absolute encyclopedia of knowledge and experiences from Similipal. And I absolutely look forward to hearing all of his stories. And we arrived in Similipal on the 14th of December, and on the 15th, really early in the morning, we went on a drive, and we were absolutely astonished at the excellent changes that had taken place in the park in the 9 years that I hadn't visited, and in fact, my companion had also not visited in 8 years. So for both of us, it was an opportunity to see how much the park had changed. Areas which had villages have now turned into beautiful meadows full of spotted deer that serve as prey base for tigers and leopards. And that very morning on the 15th, we finally saw, well, I saw my first ever tiger in Odisha, in my home state, and he saw his second tiger after having served 11 years in that park. And no, it wasn't a black tiger, no, it wasn't a melanistic tiger, but this tiger, Tiger 35 as it is called, was a young male, and he does show some signs of melanism. If you look at the stripes on his forehead, they're much darker than they usually are on tigers. And this tiger's father is actually a melanistic tiger, and so are some of his siblings. And so the dream of seeing a tiger in my home state did come true. The mission of wanting to find a tiger in Similipal, to find a tiger in Orissa did come true, but it wasn't a melanistic tiger, but I won't complain about that. A tiger is a tiger. And of course, the good news here is that after these 9 years of absolutely changed park management, highly improved park management, excellent protection measures that have been put in, and a lot of voluntary relocation by the villages that were stranded inside the reserves, we have managed to recover the prey base. We have managed to recover the habitat, and best of all, we have managed to recover the tiger population. Up from 18, now there are close to 40 tigers in Similipal, and that number is only set to grow in the days to come, as Similipal now has its entire core area of about 1,200 square kilometers, completely free of human habitation. So there is tremendous amounts of habitat now, excellent recovery of prey base, and as the prey base recovers, the tiger population shall also continue recovering. We have a lot of tigresses with cubs right now, and of course, a lot of melanism is now prevalent, a lot more than in the past. But that is something that is bound to happen in an inbred and isolated population. There are now plans to improve the genetic diversity of Similipal by reintroducing tigers from other landscapes through translocation. And fresh genes are not only going to make it a much healthier population, but also a much more fertile population that will grow even faster. And meanwhile, the park management is also working hard on recovering the prey base of the park, and hopefully, once proper guidelines, plans, and a good roadmap are in place, we will get to see well-managed, high-quality wildlife tourism as well in Similipal. With that, I would end today's webinar, and I'm keen to hear what questions you have for me.
All right, thank you so much, Aditya. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. So let's get to some of these questions. So if the tigers were to be introduced to help prevent inbreeding, would they be females?
Well, it would be females and males. So, you know, it's something that, you know, when you have a population like Similipals, where the number of females is quite high, we could do with adding a few males to the population, so that the sex ratio is more balanced. But also, when you have new areas, say a new valley that is now free of human habitation and has turned into a beautiful grassland with lots of deer and lots of good prey base. Ideally, in a place like that, you would want to reintroduce a tigress, because tigresses require areas like that where they can have plenty of prey, plenty of water, and they settle in much smaller areas. And that sort of area would be ideal for a tigress to breed. So it's going to be a big mix of both.
So can you talk about what were the key changes that were made by park managers that allowed for the improvement in the habitat and the tiger numbers?
So when the bubble was burst, you know, when the fake figures that had been peddled through the 90s and the 2000s were exposed, through the improved estimation methods, a lot of corrective action was taken. There used to be a lot of shortage in staff, field staff, for example. Say, for example, there are a certain number of staff that should be there in the park, a sanctioned strength. There were, you know, there was 40 to 50%, sometimes 60% shortage of field staff below the sanctioned strength. A lot of efforts were taken to improve protection from bushmeat poaching. Bushmeat poaching had, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, bushmeat poaching has been a massive problem in Similipal, more so than in other areas, many times more, in fact. So a lot of strong protection measures were taken to stop that. It still hasn't stopped completely, but it is much lesser and much more under control than what it used to be earlier. And the single most important change that was brought in was the incentivization of villages inside the park to move out of the park and closer to mainstream society, closer to schools and hospitals and markets, and a very lucrative compensation package that was offered to do that. And that caused all of the villages that are in that used to be inside the core area of the tiger reserve to actually volunteer to move out, which led to astonishing recovery of habitat and prey base. You know, areas where I used to see paddy fields and cattle and people are now beautiful grasslands with no sign of human habitation and full of deer. So those were the key changes that were brought in these past 9 or 10 years, Rob.
Are there areas in the park that have no tigers presently that are primed for tiger expansion?
Absolutely. So Similipal, as I said, is spread over 2,750 square kilometers, of which the core area is about 300 square kilometers. We have tiger presence in about 300 to 500 square kilometers. So in most of the rest of the park, we either have no tigers or very occasional tiger movement. So there are many areas that have been targeted for active recovery of tigers, and a lot of effort is being put in to recover the prey base in those areas. And once the deer and wild pig populations improve and protection improves in those areas, we are hopeful that all of these young cubs that we see will start to take up residence in those areas and colonize. In fact, that has already started happening in several parts of the park in the past few years.
So are there any known genetic health problems associated with pseudomelanism?
None that we know of. Big cats in general are fairly resistant to inbreeding. Inbreeding in big cats for a generation or two is almost to be expected. Every big cat population, tigers or lions, even leopards, do see some amount of inbreeding, but it's usually restricted to about 1 or 2 generations, not more. But in a place like Similipal, of course, we've been seeing a lot more than 1 or 2 generations. Besides the melanism, we haven't noticed any other health issues as such so far, but we are all very anxious that we don't wait until we find out, and that as soon as we can, we sort of invigorate this population with animals from outside this population, so that the genetics are improved.
So what is the maximum number of tigers that the park could possibly hold?
I would estimate that a park, in an average tiger habitat that's well protected, you could expect to have about 5 to 6 tigers per 100 square kilometers. So in high quality habitats, in habitats that have good prey base, high prey base, that could be 10 tigers per 100 square kilometers. So with a park like Similipal, which has a 1200 square kilometer core area, absolutely free of human habitation, I would expect 100 tigers at least just within the core area. And in the remaining 12 or 1300 square kilometers that we have, which is buffer area, I would still expect about 30 to 40 tigers, if not 50 tigers, to be able to sustain there. These would mostly be dispersing young tigers or older animals. But in total, I would say Similipal can easily, very realistically sustain 150 tigers.
Do we know when the area will be ready for visitation by tourists and tour companies like NatHab?
Well, it's going to take a while. I'm working very closely with our state wildlife wing, our state wildlife department, to start high quality wildlife tourism in our state, and we definitely intend to do that in Similipal as well. But our state has been a latecomer to the wildlife tourism bus, and it's going to be a few years before this park is ready for international tourism. But I would expect that in probably a year or two, we should start seeing the first tourists visiting Similipal on game drive.
Well, great. Thank you, Aditya. Unfortunately, that's going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for some closing comments.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. It's not a topic that you get to hear every day. I look forward to seeing you all soon again on another episode of Daily Dose of Nature. And I'll be meeting some of you on my next trip, which is at the end of this month, which is the Grand India Wildlife Adventure. So thank you, everyone. Thanks again. Have a great week. And thank you, Rob, for being such a nice presenter.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned into today. Now, if you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at the number on your screen, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.